Hello friends. My name is Nikhil, and today I'm going to tell you a story which will make you think. Let's start. The story of one of America's most notorious serial killers did not begin with murder. It began decades earlier in a modest neighborhood of Chicago, where a young boy desperately searched for approval he rarely received. Born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, John Wayne Gacy grew up in a household that was far from peaceful. To neighbors, the Gacy family appeared ordinary, but behind closed doors, life was often filled with tension, fear, and emotional turmoil. At the center of much of that turmoil was Gacy's father, a strict and often abusive man who struggled with alcoholism. According to family accounts, he frequently criticized his son, calling him weak and questioning his masculinity. No matter how hard young John tried, he seemed unable to earn the praise he craved from his father. As a child, Gacy also faced several health problems. He was overweight, suffered from blackouts, and experienced heart-related issues that often prevented him from participating in sports and other physical activities. While other boys played outside, Gacy frequently found himself on the sidelines, feeling isolated and different. The constant criticism at home combined with his struggles at school created a deep sense of insecurity. Friends later described him as someone who desperately wanted to be liked. He often sought validation from teachers, neighbors, and anyone willing to give him the attention he felt was missing at home. As the years passed, Gacy became skilled at presenting a version of himself that people wanted to see. He learned how to smile at the right moments, say the right things, and make himself appear trustworthy. Few people realized that beneath that friendly exterior, he was hiding emotions and impulses that would later have devastating consequences. In the early 1972, a young man named Timothy McCoy arrived in Chicago. Like many young travelers of the era, McCoy was passing through the city, looking for opportunities and a place to stay. What happened next would mark a turning point. McCoy crossed paths with Gacy and eventually spent time at his home. The exact details of their encounter would become known years later during investigations and interviews. According to Gacy's later statements, an altercation occurred inside the house. Whatever the circumstances, the encounter ended with Timothy McCoy losing his life. The crime was never immediately connected to Gacy. When McCoy disappeared, there was little evidence pointing investigators towards the respected businessman living in suburban Chicago. No major public alarm was raised. No extensive investigation exposed what had happened inside the house. To the outside world, John Wayne Gacy continued living his normal life. He attended social functions, he managed his business, he entertained children as Pogo the Clown, and he continued building the image of a successful, respected member of the community. But beneath that carefully crafted exterior, a much darker story was beginning to unfold. The disappearance of Timothy McCoy was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning.
The killing of Timothy McCoy in 1972 marked the beginning of a horrifying pattern that would continue for years. While the outside world saw John Wayne Gacy as a successful businessman and respected community member, a much darker reality was taking shape behind the walls of his suburban home in Norwood Park, Illinois. As the years passed, Gacy developed a method for selecting his victims. Most were young men or teenage boys, often between the ages of 14 and 25. Many came from difficult backgrounds. Some were runaways, while others were students looking for part-time work. A few were simply young men who happened to cross paths with Gacy at the wrong moment. Gacy understood exactly how to gain their trust. By the mid-1970s, his construction company was growing rapidly. Because he frequently hired temporary workers, it wasn't unusual for young men to visit his home or meet him to discuss job opportunities. He often presented himself as a generous employer. "You're a hard-working kid," he might say during an interview. "I can always use someone willing to put in the effort." For young men trying to earn money, the offer sounded legitimate. After all, Gacy was a respected businessman with community connections and a successful company. Many had no reason to suspect danger. Others met him through social gatherings, local events, or mutual acquaintances. Gacy was charming when he wanted to be. He could tell jokes, make people laugh, and create an atmosphere where others felt comfortable around him. That ability to appear trustworthy became one of his most dangerous weapons. Once victims were inside his home, Gacy often relied on manipulation rather than force. One of his most infamous tricks involved a pair of handcuffs. He would sometimes claim that he had learned a police-style escape trick. Smiling confidently, he would place one handcuff on his own wrist and demonstrate how easily he could free himself. The demonstration appeared harmless. Then he would challenge the victim to try it. "See if you can get out of these," he would say. By the time the victim realized the handcuffs were genuine and that escape was impossible, the situation had already changed. What began as a casual interaction suddenly became a terrifying trap. Investigators later learned that this deception was used repeatedly. The handcuffs allowed Gacy to gain complete control while maintaining the illusion that everything was part of a joke or game until it was too late. As the number of victims increased, Gacy faced a problem. He needed a place to hide the evidence. His solution was as disturbing as the crimes themselves. Beneath his house was a narrow crawl space, a confined area between the ground and the floor of the home. Most homeowners used such spaces for maintenance access, plumbing, or storage. Gacy saw it differently. Under the cover of darkness, he began burying victims beneath his own house. The crawl space became a hidden cemetery. The area was cramped, damp, and difficult to access. Because it was concealed beneath the structure, visitors rarely had any reason to enter it. For years, the secret remained hidden. Above ground, family gatherings took place. Friends visited. Business associates stopped by. Community members attended parties. Meanwhile, beneath their feet, evidence of unimaginable crimes lay buried. As the crawl space filled, Gacy became increasingly confident that he would never be caught. The fact that authorities had not connected him to any disappearances reinforced that belief. Throughout the mid-1970s, families across the Chicago area reported missing sons, brothers, and friends. A teenager would leave home and never return. A young worker would disappear after accepting a job. A student would vanish without explanation. Each case created heartbreak for the families left behind. Parents spent sleepless nights waiting for phone calls. They posted photographs, contacted police departments, and searched neighborhoods hoping for answers. Many refused to believe their loved ones had simply run away. There has to be something more, some families insisted, but investigations often stalled. At the time, missing person cases involving teenagers and young adults were not always treated with the urgency they receive today. Some officers assumed the missing individuals had left voluntarily or would eventually return home. Because the disappearances occurred across different locations and circumstances, there was no obvious connection linking them together. Each case appeared isolated. Each family fought its own battle for answers. As a result, a larger pattern remained hidden. While parents searched desperately for their children, Gacy continued living an apparently normal life. He attended community functions. He expanded his business. He entertained crowds as Pogo the Clown. Neighbors saw a successful contractor. Political contacts saw a respected volunteer. Employees saw a demanding but capable boss. No one imagined that one of the largest serial murder investigations in American history was quietly developing beneath the surface. By the late 1970s, the number of missing young men had continued to grow. Questions were beginning to emerge. Families were becoming more vocal. Investigators were slowly collecting pieces of a puzzle they did not yet understand, and for the first time in years, the carefully constructed mask that protected John Wayne Gacy was beginning to show cracks. The discovery that would eventually expose the horrors hidden beneath his home was drawing closer, but no one yet realized just how shocking the truth would be.
For years, John Wayne Gacy had managed to stay hidden behind a carefully constructed image of respectability. Families searched for answers, young men continued to disappear, and investigators struggled to connect the cases. But in December 1978, one disappearance would change everything. It began with a 15-year-old boy named Robert Peast. Robert was known as a responsible and hard-working teenager. He lived with his family in the Chicago area and worked part-time at a local pharmacy to earn extra money.
Friends and family described him as dependable, ambitious, and focused on his future. On the evening of December 11, 1978, Robert was working at the pharmacy when a contractor arrived to discuss a remodeling project. That contractor was John Wayne Gacy. Witnesses later recalled seeing Gacy speaking with Robert. During the conversation, Gacy reportedly mentioned a possible job opportunity that would pay more money than the teenager was currently earning. For a young man trying to save money and gain work experience, the offer sounded attractive. Before leaving, Robert told his mother he would be back shortly. Those would be among the last known words he ever spoke to his family. Hours passed. Then an entire night. Robert never came home. His parents immediately knew something was wrong. This was not normal behavior for their son. He had never simply disappeared without informing his family. As concern turned into panic, the Peast family contacted law enforcement and reported him missing. Unlike many previous disappearance cases, investigators quickly identified a potential lead. Several witnesses had seen Robert speaking with Gacy shortly before he vanished. That fact immediately drew police attention toward the successful contractor. At first, detectives approached the situation as a missing person investigation. They interviewed Gacy and asked about his interaction with Robert. Gacy admitted meeting the teenager, but denied any involvement in his disappearance. However, something about his explanations seemed unusual. As investigators continued asking questions, inconsistencies began appearing in his story. Details changed, timelines shifted, certain explanations failed to match witness statements. The more detectives looked into Gacy, the more suspicious they became. Their concerns grew even stronger when they discovered details from his past. Several years earlier, Gacy had been convicted in Iowa for crimes involving young men. Although he had served time in prison and later returned to Illinois, that history immediately raised serious questions for investigators. Detectives began wondering whether Robert Peast's disappearance might be connected to something much larger. Soon, surveillance teams were assigned to watch Gacy around the clock. Police officers followed him as he drove through the Chicago area. Investigators monitored his movements and documented his activities. The pressure on Gacy increased every day. Yet, despite the growing suspicion, detectives still lacked the evidence needed to directly connect him to Robert's disappearance. They needed something concrete, something they could take before a judge, something that would allow them to search the place many investigators had already begun to suspect: Gacy's home. As detectives continued gathering information, they obtained a search warrant. On December 21, 1978, investigators arrived at Gacy's residence in Norwood Park. At first glance, the house appeared ordinary. It looked like the home of a middle-class businessman living in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Nothing about the exterior hinted at the horrifying discoveries waiting inside. Police entered and began a systematic search. As they moved through the rooms, investigators carefully documented everything they found. Then they noticed something unusual: a strong odor. Several officers later described an unmistakable smell that seemed to linger throughout parts of the house. The odor appeared to be coming from beneath the structure. Investigators followed their instincts toward the basement area and the crawl space underneath the home. The crawl space was cramped and difficult to access. Investigators had to maneuver through narrow openings while shining flashlights into the darkness. As they examined the ground, they noticed disturbed soil in multiple locations. What they found next transformed the investigation forever. Buried beneath the house were human remains. The discovery stunned even experienced investigators. At first, officers only uncovered a few remains, but as excavation continued, they realized the situation was much larger than anyone had imagined. The search expanded. Forensic teams arrived. The crawl space became a major crime scene. Day after day, investigators carefully removed evidence from beneath the house. Each new discovery revealed another victim. The number continued to rise. Neighbors watched in disbelief as police vehicles, forensic experts, and media crews flooded the area. Rumors spread quickly through the community. Many struggled to comprehend what was happening. The friendly contractor they knew, the man who attended community events and entertained children as Pogo the Clown, was now the focus of one of the largest criminal investigations in American history. As excavation efforts continued, authorities uncovered body after body. Eventually, investigators recovered the remains of 26 victims from the crawl space alone. Additional victims would later be connected to Gacy through evidence discovered elsewhere. The scale of the crimes shocked the entire nation. News reports dominated television broadcasts and newspaper headlines. Families of missing young men anxiously followed every development, hoping for answers while fearing the worst. For many parents, the investigation brought a devastating realization. The sons they had spent years searching for might never be coming home. Meanwhile, the evidence against Gacy was becoming overwhelming. The mask he had worn for so many years was collapsing. The respected businessman, the community volunteer, the smiling clown, that image was disappearing piece by piece. And as investigators continued uncovering the truth hidden beneath his house, they were preparing for the next stage of the case, a confrontation that would force Gacy to face the evidence surrounding him. The nightmare that had remained hidden for years was finally coming to the light.
The discovery beneath John Wayne Gacy's house sent shockwaves across the United States. What investigators had initially believed was a missing person case had exploded into one of the largest serial murder investigations in American history. By late December 1978, the evidence against Gacy was mounting rapidly. Investigators had already uncovered numerous human remains beneath his home. Detectives had linked him to the disappearance of Robert Piest, and forensic teams continued uncovering new evidence almost daily. The walls were closing in. For years, Gacy had successfully hidden behind the image of a respected businessman and community volunteer. Now that carefully crafted image was crumbling under the weight of overwhelming evidence. Police intensified their questioning. At first, Gacy continued to deny involvement. He insisted he was innocent. He claimed he knew nothing about the bodies beneath his house. But detectives noticed something unusual. The pressure appeared to be affecting him. As the investigation progressed, Gacy's behavior became increasingly erratic. During long interviews, he shifted between confidence, anger, self-pity, and strange attempts at humor. Investigators later described a man who seemed unable to fully grasp the seriousness of what was happening around him. Eventually, the denials began to crack. Over several days of questioning, Gacy started talking. The information he provided shocked even veteran investigators. Rather than expressing genuine sorrow for the victims, he often spoke about the crimes in a detached and matter-of-fact manner. Detectives were disturbed by what appeared to be a lack of remorse. As questioning continued, Gacy admitted responsibility for numerous killings. The number kept growing. What had initially seemed impossible soon became a horrifying reality. Gacy eventually confessed to the murders of 33 young men and boys. The confession transformed the case from a shocking local investigation into a national nightmare. Even more disturbing, Gacy revealed that not all of the victims had been buried beneath his house. He explained that after the crawl space became crowded, he had disposed of additional victims elsewhere. This information launched new searches throughout the Chicago area. One location drew particular attention: the Des Plaines River. Following information provided during the investigation, authorities began searching sections of the river and surrounding areas. Additional remains connected to the case were eventually recovered, confirming that the crimes extended far beyond the walls of Gacy's home. Each discovery brought fresh heartbreak for families who had spent years searching for answers. For some, the investigation finally explained what had happened to their missing sons. For others, the identification process would take years.
Television crews arrived from around the world. Newspapers devoted entire front pages to the investigation. Reporters gathered outside Gacy's home day and night. The public struggled to comprehend the contradiction at the center of the story. How could a man who appeared so ordinary be responsible for such extraordinary crimes? One aspect of the case captured particular attention: the photographs of Gacy dressed as Pogo the clown. Although there was no evidence that he committed his crimes while performing as a clown, the images became inseparably linked to the case. News organizations repeatedly published photographs showing Gacy in colorful makeup and clown costumes. The contrast between the cheerful costume and the horrifying crimes fascinated and disturbed the public. Soon, headlines around the world began referring to him as the Killer Clown. The nickname spread rapidly. For many people, the image permanently altered how clowns were viewed in popular culture. A profession traditionally associated with entertainment and children's parties suddenly became linked in the public imagination with one of America's most infamous serial killers. As 1979 progressed, prosecutors focused on preparing for trial. The evidence against Gacy was extensive. Investigators had recovered victims from his property. Witness testimony connected him to several disappearances. Physical evidence linked him directly to the crimes. And most significantly, investigators had obtained detailed statements from Gacy himself. The defense faced an enormous challenge. Recognizing the strength of the prosecution's case, Gacy's attorneys pursued a different strategy. Rather than arguing that the crimes had not occurred, they focused on Gacy's mental state. The defense prepared to argue that he was not legally responsible for his actions due to insanity. Psychiatrists and psychologists were brought in to evaluate him. Some experts testified that Gacy suffered from severe psychological disorders. The defense claimed that his mental condition prevented him from fully understanding the nature of his actions. At one point, arguments were made that different aspects of his personality operated independently, contributing to his behavior. The goal was clear. If the jury accepted an insanity defense, Gacy could avoid a traditional conviction and instead be committed to a psychiatric institution. Prosecutors strongly disagreed. They argued that Gacy had carefully planned his crimes, selected victims, concealed evidence, and taken numerous steps to avoid detection. According to the prosecution, these actions demonstrated clear awareness of wrongdoing. The trial officially began in 1980. Courtrooms filled with reporters, investigators, victims' families, and curious spectators. Every development attracted national attention. Witnesses described the investigation. Experts presented forensic evidence. Family members listened as painful details about the case were discussed in public. The proceedings lasted for weeks. As testimony accumulated, the jury was presented with a picture of a man who had spent years living a double life, one face shown to the public and another hidden behind closed doors. When deliberations finally approached, one question remained at the center of the trial. Was John Wayne Gacy legally insane, or was he fully responsible for the crimes he had committed? The answer would determine his fate. And soon, the jury would deliver a verdict that would bring one of the most notorious criminal trials in American history to a conclusion. The sheer scale of the case overwhelmed investigators. Forensic specialists worked around the clock. Missing person records were reviewed. Dental records were compared. Families from across the country contacted authorities, hoping to learn whether their loved ones were among the victims. As details emerged, media attention exploded.
By the spring of 1980, one of the most shocking criminal trials in American history was nearing an end. For weeks, jurors had listened to testimony from investigators, forensic experts, psychiatrists, and witnesses. They had been presented with overwhelming evidence connecting John Wayne Gacy to the murders of 33 young men and boys. The defense had argued that Gacy suffered from severe mental disorders and should be considered legally insane. Prosecutors disagreed. They pointed to the careful planning involved in the crimes, the efforts to conceal evidence, and the years Gacy spent avoiding detection. According to the prosecution, these actions showed that he fully understood what he was doing. The jury now faced the responsibility of deciding his fate. After months of testimony and evidence, deliberations began. Many expected the jury to spend days debating such a complex and disturbing case. Instead, the decision came surprisingly quickly. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. After a relatively short period of deliberation, the jury returned with its verdict. John Wayne Gacy was found guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read in court, a sense of relief swept through many of the victims' families. For years, they had lived with uncertainty, desperately searching for answers about their missing sons and brothers. Now, at least, they had the truth. But the truth came at a devastating cost. No verdict could bring the victims back. No sentence could erase the years of suffering endured by their families. Still, the conviction represented an important moment of justice. Following the guilty verdict, the court moved to sentencing. Given the scale and severity of the crimes, the outcome was widely expected. The judge sentenced Gacy to death. For many observers, the sentence marked the conclusion of the legal battle. In reality, it was only the beginning of another lengthy chapter. As was common in death penalty cases, years of appeals followed. Gacy was transferred to death row at the prison system in Illinois, where he would remain for more than a decade. The years passed slowly. While many death row inmates faded from public attention, Gacy remained a subject of fascination for journalists, psychologists, criminologists, and the public general. What happened during those years surprised many people. Instead of disappearing into obscurity, Gacy began producing artwork. He spent countless hours painting while incarcerated. Among his most well-known works were portraits of clowns, including images inspired by his former Pogo the Clown persona. The paintings attracted significant attention. Some people viewed them as disturbing curiosities connected to a notorious criminal case. Others saw them as pieces of criminal history. Collectors began purchasing the artwork, creating controversy across the country. Many victims' families found the situation deeply upsetting.
To them, the paintings represented an attempt by a convicted murderer to profit from his notoriety. Yet, despite criticism, interest in the artwork continued. The strange popularity of the paintings became another unsettling aspect of the Gacy story. Even behind bars, he remained a figure who generated public fascination. Throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, legal appeals continued moving through the courts. Each appeal delayed the execution while judges reviewed various legal arguments. Ultimately, however, the courts upheld the conviction and sentence. As 1994 approached, the end of the case was finally drawing near. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was scheduled to be executed at the Stateville Correctional Center. Outside the prison, reporters, protesters, and victims' family members gathered as news organizations from around the world covered the event. Inside, prison officials prepared for the execution. Shortly before midnight, Gacy was taken to the lethal injection chamber. He was executed by lethal injection. According to widely reported accounts, when asked if he had any final statement, Gacy reportedly responded with the words, "Kiss my ass." Minutes later, he was pronounced dead. With his execution, one of America's most infamous criminal cases officially came to an end. Yet the impact of the case would continue long after his death. The investigation revealed significant challenges facing law enforcement during the 1970s. Many of Gacy's victims had disappeared from different jurisdictions. Information sharing between police departments was often limited, making it difficult to recognize patterns connecting multiple cases. As a result, important lessons emerged from the tragedy. Over time, police agencies developed improved systems for tracking missing persons, sharing information across jurisdictions, and coordinating major investigations. Advances in forensic science, computer databases, and interagency cooperation would eventually make it easier to identify connections that might once have gone unnoticed. The case also challenged public awareness. It challenged the assumption that dangerous criminals always appear suspicious or live on the fringes of society. Gacy had been a businessman, a community volunteer, a political participant, a neighbor, someone many people trusted. That contradiction remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the story. The man responsible for some of the most horrific crimes in American history did not hide in isolation. He lived among ordinary people and successfully convinced many that he was respectable and harmless. Today, the Gacy case is studied by criminologists, psychologists, and law enforcement professionals around the world. For investigators, it serves as a lesson in the importance of persistence and cooperation. For society, it stands as a reminder that appearances can be deceptive. And for the families of the victims, it remains a painful chapter that can never truly be closed. More than 40 decades after the crimes were uncovered, the story of John Wayne Gacy continues to be remembered, not because of the killer himself, but because of the 33 young lives that were lost and the lessons their tragic deaths taught future generations. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.